Now that we know how to create our own custom methods, let's take a look at method parameters. Let's say we wanted to create a method that would help us log information to the console window. Let's call this method write_to_log. Now if we set this up like a method in the last section, it wouldn't be very useful. What would we write to log? We don't really know. So instead, we are going to add parameters to this method. Parameters are the variables and values that go inside these parentheses. They're how we pass data into methods so that we can either get something out of them or have something specific happen inside of them. It's worth noting that parameters can also be called arguments. While technically there is a small difference between parameters and arguments, most people use those two terms interchangeably. Let's say we want our method write_to_log to read in a string message and an integer index number. We can pass these values in as parameters. We do so, again, by writing them inside the parentheses. We'll start by saying string message. Next, we'll say int index. Now, in order to call this method, we need to pass into it a string and an index. Then, on line 13, I will write debug.log and we'll pass in message plus a string literal that is just a single space plus index. The result is our message will be displayed in the console window, followed by a space, followed by our integer index. If I'd like to call this method, I can't just say write_to_log with two parentheses and a semicolon. That won't work, because write_to_log requires a very specific number of parameters with a very specific data type. We know that we need a string and an int, but the order is also very important. I couldn't, for instance, say 3, my message. This wouldn't work either. As a matter of fact, if I go back to Unity, we'll see we have a problem. We will see in the console window that we have a couple of errors. If we read these errors, we can get some indication of the problem. We can see that custom methods.write_to_log has some invalid arguments. If we want to learn more or see the line of code that's at fault, we can always double-click it and MonoDevelop will highlight it for us. Since write_to_log requires a string and then an integer, I can see that I have my parameters backwards. Now if I call write_to_log and I pass in this is my error message followed by a value of 1, everything will work okay. If I go back to Unity, I'll see that my errors have gone away, and when I press play, I'll see my message followed by my index. We can use custom methods with parameters whenever we need to modify what the method does based on the values we pass in. However, as stated before, you always have to be sure to use the correct number of parameters and the correct data types in the correct order.